5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
It's not Friday, it's not 5 to 5, it's not Crackerjack, it's actually Thursday. It's 7 o'clock at TTFM. Good evening and welcome to our little get-together.
Well, the TTF are having a ball. Instead of meeting up in a big hall, we're trying hard to keep the virus in place. At the moment we can't meet face to face. Andy Graham to the left of me, Paul Hutton to the right. Here I am, stuck in the traffic with you. Yes, I'm stuck in the traffic with you. And I'm wondering what it is I should do. I'm so scared in case my clients are here. And I'm thinking I should have bottle beer. Derek Capes to the left of me, Phil Blythe to the right. Here I am, stuck in the traffic with you. Well, we started out with Miranda, and we're glad that they have done so much. But the client comes and calling, slaps you on the back and says, please, it's about your fees. I think it's good that we have got DJs with lots of knowledge of the UK highways. I'm trying hard to find a word that will rhyme, but it's late and I have run out of time. Andy Ferguson to the left of me, Graham Hanson to the right. Here I am, stuck in the traffic with you. Well, we all work here in traffic and we try to do the best that we can. And the clients come and knock and slap us on the back and say, please charge more fees. Well, I don't know why I came here tonight. We all work here in traffic. I'm so scared in case I fall off the tram. And I'm wondering how I'll get down the stairs. Clowns to the left of me, jokers to the right. Here I am, stuck in the traffic with you. And yes, honey, stuck in the traffic with you. And Steve Ladyman, stuck in the traffic with you. And Steve Norris, stuck in the traffic with you.
Still have absolutely no idea who that is singing that. Stuck in the Traffic, the TTF version for 2021. Good evening, welcome to what we call TTFM. It's Paul Hutton over here and it's Andy Graham over there, and the two of us will see you through an hour of chat as we discuss today at the Transport Technology Forum conference, look ahead to tomorrow as well. And we have two special guests this evening after the triumph, the overrunning triumph of having Michael Rodd on last night's TTFM. Tonight we have two guests, former Transport Ministers, Steve Norris in the blue corner and Stephen Ladyman in the red corner. And we have promised Stephen Ladyman, talking of the red corner, that we will definitely not overrun tonight because Liverpool play Chelsea at 8:15, and so whether we overran or not, he wouldn't be here. Good evening, Andy Graham. How are you, sir?
I'm very well, thank you, Paul. I've got another good day at the conference today. Some very good material. I thought particularly the innovation section in the morning was very interesting. Carla does a magnificent job as always. And then a London centred session in this afternoon, which I thought was really top notch. And thanks to Spencer for hosting that.
Yeah,
and looking forward to tomorrow.
Yeah, we'll look ahead to tomorrow in a few minutes' time. Let's bring in TTF manager Darren Capes to join us now, because Darren, I'm just interested to know your take on today, because in the end, you're the person who's sort of overseen the ideas of what you wanted in the conference. What did you make of it?
Yeah, and by that you mean the person that writes the checks. Yes, yeah, it's been another great day, another really interesting day. We've had some really good stuff. We've gone into territory we don't normally go into with the TTF, and that's a territory inside the M25. We've been very bad in the past at engaging with London boroughs, and actually, I think most people, a lot of people in the TTF wouldn't realise there actually are 32 highway authorities in London. We only seem to think about the one big one. So it's been really good today to hear a session led by London councils, looking at London issues, looking at things like EV charging and parking, which are things that are really important in London. So that was really good. And as Andy said, Carla, as you would expect, played a blinder this morning. The innovation session was excellent. Some really good stuff around small to medium enterprises. How do we get new players into the market? How do we buy stuff from new and interesting companies? How do we buy technology? How do we know what people are up to and what research is going on? Some really good stuff. And I think we also had a first. Certainly for the TTF conference, and probably for any transport conference I've been to, we had a session presented by a guy that works for Kraft, a food company. I don't think I've ever had that before, but he was very good. He's very crafty. He talked really eloquently about distribution and how we can use technology to distribute things better and stop the 32% of lorries that currently drive around carrying fresh air. How we can stop that and be more efficient. So all in all, a great session.
Yeah, I thought I was going to say, Darren, I thought when I saw that particular session, it reminded me of a friend of mine who during the first lockdown, more for trying to find something to do and to help out the community than for the money. He took a job as a supermarket delivery driver, and he said he turned up one evening and there were 4 of the same supermarket vans outside the same block of flats. And he said, well, don't you have some sort of system that works out who should take it to, so that, you know, one person delivers to 4? And they went, that's a good idea. So perhaps there is an opportunity for somebody listening.
I think there's a real opportunity for technology there. Yeah. So yeah, it's a really good stuff, and we're looking forward to the final day tomorrow with Andy starring in the morning, talking about the shape of traffic. I'm really looking forward to that. I think that'll be another great session. So.
Yep, it will be, and we will look ahead to that after the first half of our big interview this evening with Stephen Norris and Stephen Ladyman that we'll come to in a moment. But let me first of all introduce you. Oh, and by the way, Steve Gooding. We have so many Steves this evening. Steve Gooding will also be on just to look forward to the closing session and talk about the keynote speaker that we've recruited to speak tomorrow just after lunch to close off the TTF Conference 2021. On TTFM this evening, let me introduce you to some of the background people and give you a bit of idea of what we're on about this evening. Remember, you can join in by clicking the text box on YouTube, or you can tweet us. The hashtag is #TTFM. It's going to be monitored by Luke, who will then text me any of the tweets that come through. He doesn't know that yet, so I'm telling him at the same time I'm telling everyone else, because I've realized I don't have enough windows in front of me on my screens. So Luke, who's pressing the buttons, will make all of that work really well tonight, as he does with all our TTF videos too. And we're going to introduce you to our live voiceover man. Good evening, live voiceover man.
Good evening, Paul Hutton, avoiding the window tax by not having very many windows open, I can see.
Absolutely, and our voiceover man is an incredible person. You know, I always think that your internal monologue must be very interesting. It must be like living in a Hollywood movie.
I sound like this all the time, even when I order a pizza. When I pick up the phone and just say to them, can I have 1 pepperoni, extra cheese, and please, no mushrooms?
Yeah, you think he's joking. That is genuinely how he orders a pizza. Talking of jokes, Andy Graham has pulled a load of jokes for us this evening. Andy, we're going to try and work out the punchline to bad jokes. So fire away with one for us, would you please?
A lorry load of jelly and a load of custard have collided on the M1. Drivers will be...
A trifle delayed. Go on.
Very good.
Yeah, very good. Thank you very much indeed. Let me come out with.
I see we're going for a joke in the very loosest sense of the word here.
So
Okay, motorists have asked Steve Gooding of the RAC Foundation why there are no RAC vans in Liverpool. He said they were all...
Hey.
Very good.
Very good indeed. Right, should we move on before
Yes, I think so.
before we
Please,
see
please,
the
yes.
listening figures plummet? And let's meet our big interview this evening. So I think it's time for voiceover man to say,
Ladies and gentlemen, tonight's big interview on TTFM.
So our guests on tonight's TTFM, we've got two transport ministers of the past. They're both from Liverpool and they're both called Stephen. One of them is a red and one of them is a blue. But enough of football. We have the former Labour Transport Minister in Gordon Brown's government, Stephen Ladyman, and Steve Norris, known to all of us as, among other things, a non-exec at Cubic and the president of ITS UK. Steve Norris was Transport Minister in John Major's government in the 90s. So we brought you both together tonight just to sort of talk through some of your memories as Transport Minister. And I think Stephen Ladyman, we'll call you Stephen and Steve Norris Steve. Stephen, I understand when you became Transport Minister, the first thing you were told was to get absolutely no publicity whatsoever.
Well, it's pretty much like that, yes. I must correct you, first of all. One of my great claims to fame is that I was the first person that Gordon Brown fired when he took over. So I was actually a minister in Tony Blair's government, I'm very proud to say.
Right.
But yes, the rationale when I became a transport minister was, let's have no publicity about transport, because all the previous publicity had been bad publicity. And I have to say that was one of the great frustrations I had throughout my time as a transport minister, because actually I thought there were some great things to talk about, but largely we weren't allowed to.
I remember saying to Brian Mulwinny, who was the Secretary of State, we're doing some terrific stuff, on road pricing. He said, well, stop it.
Yeah.
It's terrific, and we've got the best people in the business. It's really interesting stuff. It's got to be the future. He said, Steve, you're not listening. Stop it.
Yes.
Fine. Okay, got it.
But you did actually, though, Steve. You brought in the first speed camera, and that's still talked about today.
Yes. Oh, yeah. I mean, funny enough, the interesting part about that was the police and I had a disagreement, because their idea was we should hide all the cameras so we can catch all the people who are speeding. And it genuinely took a lot of persuasion to say, no, the point is stop people speeding by letting them know there's a camera. So actually, we insisted on, and when Stephen was in charge, he didn't change this. We put the reflective back on the camera and said, you've got to make the camera obvious, because the whole point is to slow people down, not to nick them. And a later iteration for me, fun enough, was when I was one of the team that is now Genoptic, but was then Speed Check Services. We delivered the first, average speed camera. And again, believe it or not, at the time, and Stephen will remember this, Alistair Darling had a regime where the local, I think they were called the road safety partnerships, were funded out of fine revenue. And we said, the problem is nobody speeds when it's an average speed camera, so nobody gets nicked. And therefore, as a result, we are useless to you because you don't get any revenue from us. So you're happier when people get killed. Now that's an exaggeration. And Alistair, to his great credit, said, yeah, you're right. And he changed the regime. And that's the point of average speed took off.
It was...
I remember, what I remember most, and I wonder if Stephen shares this with me, we came in, in 1992, not with much of a majority. We'd been in for 13 years. We were, nobody was particularly pleased with us. It was just that at the time, I think, for whatever reason, people said, well, we'll stick with what we know. And when we met the first day, we met the permanent secretary, wonderful Sir Patrick Brown. And we said, now, Patrick, what are you going to do about rail privatisation? And he said, Minister, he said, bit of a problem there. we haven't done anything really. And John McGregor said, oh, why is that? He said, well, we didn't think you'd win. And to his credit, he said, but don't worry, we've got people on it, Thursday and Friday, after Stephen and others, after the election. And so he said, we'll have something for you by Tuesday next week. And so they did, And I'll tell you what, I came away, I was in the department thankfully for quite a long time. I came away with a huge amount of respect for civil servants.
Me too. I mean, I had both in health and in transport, I was blessed to have most wonderful private office and really got on well, and they couldn't do enough for me. And actually, when you hear about ministers who are arguing and having fights with their private office, I think it says an awful lot more about the minister than it does about the private office, because they were wonderful. They couldn't do enough for me. And some of the people that, because I'm a geek at heart, I like, my background was IT and computers, and working with people like Eric Sampson, Sir David King, absolutely brilliant people. And there was loads of people like that throughout the department.
Yeah,
interesting. I want to just ask, because you mentioned about being in health, Stephen, and did either of you have any background in transport or any knowledge of transport before you were given the brief?
No, other than driving cars and loving motorbikes, not in transport. And actually, when I went into health, my the Guardian, the night I was the morning after I was appointed, said that I'd been appointed for my background in pharmaceuticals, and Norman Warner had been appointed for his background in social care. And when we got in the department the next morning, we discovered he was in charge of pharmaceuticals and I was in charge of social care.
Sounds about right. Sounds about right. Well, I tell you what, it's quite an interesting thing. Enoch Powell, of all people, once said, the worst health ministers are doctors. And what he meant was that ministers aren't there because they're experts. And ministers are there because they are politicians who are appointed by the Prime Minister to ensure that in their department, broadly what the government stands for is delivered. That's all. And actually, in some ways, having too much expert knowledge is quite dangerous, because it means you've got a very fixed idea of what you think should happen, and it may not be actually what the rest of the world thinks. So, I in my case, my only experience is that I had actually sold motor cars for a living. I used to work for Ford Motor Company at one time, and I was advising, garages on their on their finances, and I thought I can do this. So I basically left Ford and started my own dealerships. And in fact, Neil Kinnock, I remember on one occasion when I seconded the Queen's speech back in the 80s, Neil Kinnock, who was leader of the opposition at the time, said, we have to ask ourselves, would you buy a used car from this man? As far as I'm aware, most of the front bench opposite already has. It's just about true. But, it's a really important point, Paul. Never think that you want to have experts in the job. Let the experts advise ministers, but in the end, there's a political ambition, which is what the government stands for. Well, that's why, for example, that is why, Brian Mulroney said to me, don't talk about road pricing, because we're not going to do it, and all it will do is stir up people who won't like it. And I think I'm right, aren't I, Stephen? That's how it works.
Yeah, I won't mention his name, but one of my predecessors as a road minister couldn't drive, didn't have a driving license, lived in London all his life, and so never needed to drive.
Well, no, it's interesting going back on the old speed camera thing, because of course you introduced them, Steve, but it was you, Stephen, that had to justify the things to Clarkson. Therefore gave you that famous, global celebrity, famous for 15 minutes as the man with the speed cameras. And actually, they had the speed camera on the track when you drove around. What was the?
Well, they didn't. They put that in post, I have to say. So that wasn't there when I was driving around. But that, I've got to say, being on Top Gear was fabulous. And and it puts a politician's fame into context, because when you become an MP, you appear on Panorama or Question Time or something like that, and you think, everybody knows me now. Nobody knows you, because the only people who watch those programs are other MPs.
Yeah.
But Top Gear, for weeks afterwards, people were stopping me in the street, honking their horn. Little boys in supermarkets were hiding behind their dad's legs, peering out, at me. And even years and years later, I've moved to Somerset after I left Parliament, and I was walking through Shepton Mallet, and a little boy on his bicycle screeched to a halt beside me and said, "You were on Top Gear," and it must have been 5 years after I'd been on Top Gear.
God love Dave. So, but my question therefore is, when you went into the department and went, "Hey guys, I'm going to go and do Top Gear," how much support did you have for that idea when you first mooted it?
Well, I think they thought it was. I think it was made possible actually by the fact that the previous week, Clarkson had made a joke about the fact that the Secretary of State's name was Darling, and the Roads Minister was Ladyman. So they made some sort of slightly off-colour joke about that. But somebody in the department sort of mentioned it to me that they'd made that joke, and we were working on traffic cameras at the time and trying to reformat the way funding was used. And I just said to the publicity people, well, why don't we see if they'd like us on Top Gear? And they said, well, would the Secretary of State agree with that? And surprisingly, he did. But so, it went ahead, and it was a wonderful experience. I've got to say, on traffic cameras, though, Steve introduced the yellow boxes. Yeah. I introduced the average speed cameras through motorways. Yeah. And not everything, I have to say, is great experience in transport, because one of the things you get as a transport minister on your weekend box are the reports of the fatalities on the motorways from the Highways Agency. And one of the first ones that I opened up after I became the minister was referring to two roads workers who'd been killed because somebody going through speeding through a roadworks at night in the rain had lost their way, gone through the cones and hit these two poor people. So I immediately said, we have got to do something about speeding through motorway roadworks. And they came up with average speed cameras, and
they were our cameras.
They've worked brilliantly, to be frank with you. I mean, we all hate them when we're driven 50 miles an hour for about 20 miles. But they keep people alive.
I'd like to point out, I'm quite hurt actually, Stephen, because surely one of the highlights you must have had that would have been in about mid-2000s, there was a director of a company called ITIS, Steve Norris, helped get the then Transport Minister in to actually find out more about what ITIS was doing, using very cleverly the movement of mobile phones to monitor traffic. And ITIS worked with a company at the time called Traffic Link, and so the bloke in charge of the information at Traffic Link had to show the minister around and explain how the traffic was gathered, and that happened to be me. And I would have met you in the mid-2000s, and I showed you round and explained how we did it, and then there was a presentation to you in the boardroom. And I remember asking you about that when then you wrote the column for me when I edited Smart Highways magazine, and you said you didn't remember me, which is no surprise, but you did remember the visit. How much of your two jobs was involved in actually being wheeled to places like an office opposite Smithfield Market to be shown around brilliant new ideas, with people desperately obviously looking for taxpayer money to fund the expansion.
Well, I mean, I thoroughly enjoyed that part of the job, and I do still remember that visit actually, and the technology that was involved in it, and the organisation that was involved in it was just, you know, mind blowing. And so much of my time was like that, and I can remember another visit that I made to the McLaren works. And then McLaren was the boss of McLaren was Ron Dennis.
Yeah.
And previous week I'd visited a university that was working on some very advanced transport stuff, and one of the things they were working on was a chip to monitor engine performance, and it could monitor 64 different aspects of energy performance at a time. When I went to McLaren, they were working on the next generation of chip that could monitor 128 different channels of at the time, and had this conversation with Ron Dennis, and you know, politically there's a million miles between Ron Dennis and myself, but Ron said, You've got all of these little pots of research going on that you fund. Put them all together, give them to me. I'll get the Formula One world to spend this money, and I guarantee that we'll save 20. We'll come up with something that saves 20% of carbon emissions on car transport. Yeah. And I went away from that and thought, you know, he's probably right, and so I actually floated that in the department. Why don't we make a big contribution to really horizon thinking technologies, and have somebody like Formula One people, you know, experts look at it and see if they can make a step change in the way we create efficient engines. But unfortunately, like all these good ideas, the Treasury then says, no, if you lose a 5-figure sum on a bad research investment, nobody will notice. You lose an 8-figure sum and you'll end up in front of a select committee. So we're not doing that.
Stephen, thank you so much for linking a visit to a small office near Smithfield Market to be shown around by me with a visit to the McLaren works to chat to Ron Dennis. That, I think, has either suggests that your priorities are slightly odd, or that you're just paying me a very large compliment. Thank you very much. Gentlemen, hold on where you are. Go and grab yourself a drink or whatever. We will come back for more chats about ministerial memories in a few minutes' time. But let's look ahead to tomorrow at the TTF conference. I think actually we need voiceover man to appear to basically introduce looking ahead to tomorrow at the TTF conference.
Looking ahead to tomorrow at the TTF conference.
How does he do it? How does he do it? Let's get Steve Gooding on, because Steve is hosting the closing discussion and also the closing keynote speaker. And Steve, we announced the closing keynote speaker just before the close of play of today's conference. So tell us more about it.
Okay, thanks, Paul. And yes, we've had a really good conference, I think, and it started off really well with that invitation from our chums in ASIN to get involved with them, and we're going to round off really well because tomorrow we've got Professor Phil Blythe, who was with us in person this time last year and who really laid down a challenge for the Transport Technology Forum membership to help him at that point. Well, really, did we have any sense of quite how challenging the year ahead was going to be? I don't think so. But I'm really interested to hear what he's got to say about how well TTF members rose to the challenge. I think pretty well, but let's hear what he says. And about how we go from here on. What's the role of technology? What's the role of traffic technology in helping rebuild better, build back better? I think that's the expression. And that's going to be great. We've got some other people on that closing session that's going to be really good. We've got Jenny coming in there. But before I wind up here on what we're going to do to end the session, I just have to share with listeners that I was in the room when Steve Ladyman told Alistair Darling he was going on Top Gear. And I'm told Alistair Darling only broke sweat twice. Once when he was Chancellor and the entire banking system was collapsing, and the other was when Steve said, "And I've agreed to go on Top Gear." And it was quite an interesting moment. I do remember Alistair saying, "Just keep repeating stuff. They do edit it, you know." So there you go. But before I lose my slot here, I just got to say, Steve mentioned in that last bit of interview the work he did on road worker safety. And I have to say, as a standout achievement of a minister in my time, and I've worked with a lot of them, that's the one that sticks in my mind. There are people alive today working in the industry who wouldn't be here today if Steve hadn't made that a number one priority. So,
Stephen Ladyman, feel free
marks.
to come in. Steve Norris is just out of the room at the moment, but Stephen Ladyman, if you want to come back on that particular compliment, I can't believe it's publicly a civil servant or a former civil servant is saying nice things about a minister. So there you go.
Well, let me say nice things about Steve Gooding as well. I mean, he was one of those people I mentioned that were an absolute joy to work with, and took my ideas and my feelings seriously, and did his very best to make them a reality. It was a pleasure working with him.
Thanks for that. So there we go. Both great ministers to work with. It'll be a great end to the week tomorrow. Hopefully people will log on in the morning. They'll hear what Andy has to say with his guests, and then we'll do a wind up, and we'll be slightly provocative. I'm going to put some thoughts on the table that might make people a little bit uncomfortable, but we've got to think laterally here. We've got to think there are some huge challenges facing the country, facing the world, climate change, carbon emissions, all of those things. This is not a world where we're going to spend that much time worrying about traffic jams. We've got to think about the bigger picture. And that's where I think that closing session is going to take us.
And the closing session tomorrow afternoon is at what time, Mr. Gooding?
I believe the closing session is at roughly, but you'll set me straight on this because I haven't got it on my screen, 1:45.
It is indeed 1:45 tomorrow afternoon. We'll have Phil Blythe first, then the discussion, and that will wrap up this year's Transport Technology Forum conference. Beforehand, though, Andy, you're hosting the Shape of Traffic session in the morning at 10:30.
That's right. I've got a session where we talk about the work that we did to rise to Phil's challenge of just about a year ago, collecting a load of traffic data and working out what had happened during COVID, but also looking at all sorts of other sets of traffic data, because we think that not just traffic flow, but the whole shape of traffic has changed. And I've got some guests. I've got Arabs talking about the work that they did. I've got Stephen Hunter from Warrington. They've done some magnificent work in collecting all of their traffic data across all different modes. And from Vivacity, Mark Nicholson talking about ways to detect pedestrians and cyclists, which I think will be very interesting. So do please join us tomorrow for a 10:30 kickoff.
10:30 kickoff. You've got all the details, and if you need to find them, if you haven't actually signed up yet, it's all on Eventbrite. You can find it all on the highways-news.com website, all the details about the TTF conference this year. Highways News is one of the media partners of the TTF this year. We're very proud. In our first year, we haven't quite reached 1 year of Highways News to be the TTF's media partner, and that's why you're getting the stream coming through Highways News this evening, and we'll have all the details on there tomorrow. And talking of media partners, there's one other media partner, which is again talking about bridging the gap. Let's bring in Alec Peachy, who has two hats that he wears. One is he does the comms for Elcrig, and the other is that he owns his own website, transportandenergy.com, which is again linking the whole issues of how many charging places you might need. How are you going to power the cars of the future when we move to electrification? So good evening, Alec. Thanks for joining us on TTFM.
Good evening, Paul. Thanks for having me on.
So tell me about Transport and Energy.
Yeah, exactly. As you're touching upon there, it's designed to unite professionals from both the sectors. My background is obviously I edited Highways magazine for a few years, and I subsequently went on to edit a title all to do with the energy system called Network, which looked at the role of the distribution network operators and gas networks specifically, so how they get the power to our properties and businesses. And it was during that time, more in that role, that I got chatting with the electricity DNOs, and they were talking about the challenges around the extra capacity that would likely be needed on the grid to allow for the expansion in the uptake of EVs. But one of the problems they were finding was that there was a very siloed mentality between both the transport and energy sectors, which, you know, is something that really resonated with me. And I believe that, you know, there is a gap, and that's the reason for the launch of transportandenergy.com, to unite both those sectors and the professionals to try and accelerate decarbonisation as well. You know, the coming together of both of those sectors is key. They're both, you know, big emitters, and for that reason, you know, they will lead the agenda on reaching net zero.
Okay, so it's transportandenergy.com and highways-news.com, the two media partners of the TTF conference this year. And in 30 seconds, Alec, we had Martin Duffy, your boss, I guess, from Elcrig, on the conference yesterday. Tell me what Elcrig are up to at the moment.
Yeah, so Elcrig, obviously our purpose is to initiate collaboration and innovation within the local road sector. We have a number of local council members, and at the moment, you know, we're doing a lot around obviously procurement, which Martin touched upon in his discussion with Darren yesterday. We have a number of frameworks that we are trying to deliver on, lots of different things going on with webinars, etc. And of course, you know, the whole EV agenda, you know, is an important one for local councils. You know, local authorities will be the ones tasked with delivering the infrastructure. And again, they'll be needing to unite with energy professionals, both within their own councils and more widely.
Thank you very much, Alec. Thanks for being on TTFM tonight.
Ladies and gentlemen, we return to tonight's big interview on TTFM.
So, Stephen and Steve, what about technology when you were ministers?
You know, the interesting thing is, Paul, that when I was a minister, ITS literally was in its infancy. You know, I'm only the second president of ITS as it is in the UK. And at that time, we literally were looking at things like, you know, lane access. We were looking at early camera versions, what Mr. Gatsanidis was doing in Holland and so on. You know, it was very primitive stuff. And ironically for me, most of my involvement in high technology took place after, when we founded ITIS, which was not long after I left the department. And, you know, that was a 10-year journey. To get to the stage. That's a quite interesting thing, actually, because we originally thought that if we could say to a haulier, we could save you half an hour per vehicle per day, that would amount to, if you've got 100 trucks, you know, that's X hundred hours of time. And how much does it cost you to have an hour of time or whatever? And we thought that would be our market. And just as a classic example of how these things work out, that turned out to be completely wrong. Because what would happen is the transport manager would say, I don't need you to tell me. I've got all my lads, they've all got mobile phones. They weren't smartphones in those days, but they were mobile phones, you know. And he said, I'll ring up and I say, hey, Steve, where are you? He said, well, I'm on the A24, but I tell you what, there's a hell of a crush here, boss. You know, I'm not, fine, okay, thank you very much. Well, when do you reckon you'll get to, you know, your destination? He said, I know my people, because actually it turns out that most trucks are doing, you know, daily runs from A to B and back, and A to C and back, and A to D and back. And so we found actually that our market was the people in charge of roads who had a legal obligation to decongest them. Yeah. So that when you could provide this data, it wasn't going to the haulier, it was actually going to TfL or TFGM or, you know, in those cases, the Highways Agency and so on. They were the people who actually wanted to use the data. The market was completely different. Around the world, that's what we sold. So when Sally Traffic comes along, she was actually an ITIS person, and then later when we sold it to INRIX, an INRIX person, you know. It's an object lesson. And a lot of the technology that we're developing now, you know, smart city technology, fascinating stuff, really, really interesting stuff. I'll give you a whole journey. I can price every part of your journey on one app and get you from your home to somebody else's home in the other part of the country. Isn't that brilliant? And the answer is, no, not really. I'm perfectly happy. I know how to get on the tube. Anyway, and then I buy a ticket. What's the big deal? You know, what are you trying to sell me, guys? Is it just because you want to follow me and you want to get data out of me? I'm not that stupid. Go away. You know,
of course, I was working very much on the really early floating vehicle data that I don't think it's breaking any rules because it's so long ago that it was basically Stobart and National Express coaches bleeping away once a minute, and that was pretty.
No, you couldn't get enough density out of that. And what switched it was when we realised that if you could get, say, either O2 or Vodafone, or one of, you know, they were the two dominant providers at the time. If you did one, you could get enough granularity to be able to say, I know what's happening at the bottom of Edgware Road, and I also know what's happening by St John's Wood part of the Edgware Road.
But the interesting thing was the fact that, of course, then when that famous presentation to Mr. Ladyman happened, we were absolutely convinced that this was the way forward. You didn't need cameras. You didn't need to have any other monitoring. You didn't need loops in the road because the phones would do it all. And of course, this was where I was introduced to the joys of politics, in as much as Stephen sat in the boardroom in Charterhouse Street and said, yeah, you're absolutely right. It's brilliant. Can't touch it because our policy is switch your phone off when you get in your car. So there is no way we can ever pay for something, because if the papers get hold of the fact that we're getting our traffic information from mobile phones in cars, I'm dead.
Yeah, that was an issue. Yeah.
It's a bit like on the other TTFM program, we spoke to Michael Rodd about how when he was on Tomorrow's World, he saw a load of great ideas that never then saw the light of day commercially. You two must have seen some fantastic stuff that is long forgotten, but could have been groundbreaking, but just didn't turn out that way.
Just because it's clever doesn't mean to say it's any use. That's a really important thing to remember. Just because it's very clever doesn't mean anybody's going to. Exactly. That's why, you know, we had a very clever way of saving an earlier half an hour, but Fred does it for me.
But it's about not only it being clever and practical and effective. It's also about having people that recognise how important it could be. And I'm thinking here about Max Mosley, when he was president of the FIA. He came to see me to say, if only we could get electronic stability control to be standard in cars, we could save X lives. And he put a huge amount of effort behind making that happen. And of course, it did happen eventually. They are pretty much standard. And he'd previously done that with ABS braking systems. Now, can you imagine, you know, Max, for all sorts of reasons, gets a lot of criticism in certain places. But if you credit him with having got ABS and electronic stability control as standard in cars, he has probably saved hundreds of thousands of lives around the world as a result of that.
Absolutely, because that, to be fair, is where Formula One has always had its greatest strength, isn't it? Because what today is what, you know, my car is fitted with 5 years' time.
Yes.
But I'll tell you one thing about transport, which I really enjoyed. I was a PPS in what was then the Department of the Environment, and then I was Nick Ridley's PPS when he was at Trade and Industry, and then in the Home Office with Ken Baker, and then, you know, in transport for a long time. And I'll tell you what I loved about transport. There's no bloody politics in it. It's terrific. It's really good. It's practical. Yeah. I found in London, you know, that I could talk to any of the local authorities, might be Labour, Tory, Lib Dem, no overall control, doesn't really matter. What's your problem? It would be a pretty common problem. Let's help solve it, you know. And I love the fact that, yes, there'd be an argument about whether you privatise the railway or whatever, but actually even that was fairly academic. Labour never, after we had done it, Labour didn't undo it, and neither did we ever do it. I mean, in fact, ironically, the closest we've ever got to renationalising the railways is right now, when reliant on the government bailing them out, but not for their own reasons. But, I really did like the fact that there's something about the Department for Transport which got more and more interesting in my time, which was it played to an agenda that was just beginning to emerge about the environment and about air quality. It played to an agenda about the standard of living in cities and how to decongest cities, about the importance of public transport as against the private car, the importance of new modes, of walking and cycling and so on, which really hadn't had any time spent on them in the past by the department. So I remember famously when I introduced the first national cycling strategy and said to my boys, why don't we do more about cycling? And they said, well, the thing is, Minister, not many people cycle. You sort of say, yeah, that's why if you don't put tomatoes on the shelf, nobody will ask for them. Put them on the shelf and see how many, but the great thing is, it was almost common sense and doability that attracted me.
Yeah.
I've got the Jubilee Line extension to be really, really proud of. I've behind me there's a piece of metal, heavy metal. It's one of the teeth on one of the tunnel boring machines that we had doing the Jubilee Line extension. And I can say, I did that, forced it past the Treasury, forced it past some people in my own department, and it's there, and it'll be there for 100 years.
But one of the unfortunate things, though, is that transport ministers almost never get to open the projects they start.
No, I never did. Absolutely. I was going to mention one thing about the tunnel boring machine. You've just reminded me, seeing as we're not supposed to be too serious, Anna. You know that they're always called, anybody involved in civil engineering knows that your tunnel boring machines are always called, they always have ladies' names, a bit like ships, And so the two that they've just done Crossrail with were called Elizabeth and Victoria. Very, very. Ours were called Sharon and Tracy. And when I said, why? They said, well, the thing is, Minister, and this, don't tell anybody this. The thing is, Minister, like all good Essex girls, they may be very boring, but they do go all the way. Thank you very much. That's a perfect explanation. So, that's it. There's the story.
I got to open a bit of motorway that goes past Old Trafford in Manchester, and Look North interviewed me that evening after I opened it, and she said, "What does a Liverpool boy like you feel about opening a motorway in Manchester?" And I said it was £100 million well spent to help the people of Manchester get to Anfield more quickly.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm not going to go anywhere near football with the joy that I know Mr. Norris had after the Merseyside derby a couple of Saturdays ago. So we
won't intrude on private grief.
We shall skirt around that one quickly. I'm going to just finish off by just asking, because obviously you've gone on to many other things. Obviously, Steve, president of ITS UK must be the pinnacle of your career. Stephen, columnist of Smart Highways magazine, must have been pretty high up on yours. But do you miss your time as an MP and as a minister? And what were the best and worst bits of it?
I don't miss being an MP. I mean, when I started, it was a wonderful job, but then all that expenses stuff came out. And although there was nothing ever found about my expenses, in fact, the only criticism my local newspaper came up was when they discovered that my office had bought Tutti Frutti Post-it notes instead of ordinary yellow ones, and they made that the headline of the local newspaper. But unfortunately, everybody got tarred with the same brush. So being an MP was a less pleasant job after that. But being a minister was an absolutely fabulous job. It was a privilege to be a minister, and there are many things in my ministerial career I'm very, very proud of. And I can look at things which I know have saved lives and made people's lives better as a result of of the work that me and the team did at that time. So yes, I miss being a minister. I miss the power of being a minister. I don't miss being an MP, unfortunately.
I echo every word of that. That's exactly what I would have said. And you know, as I say, one or two things you can say, I did that, and I'm proud of that. Or no single person ever does this, but the team I led did this. A group of us together, officials and politicians, did this. You know, and do you know what, Stephen will, I know, agree with this. You never work as hard. You are, you know, often in bed after midnight and up at, you know, 6 o'clock in the morning to be doing something else. It's the hardest you ever work, and it's the one job I'd take tomorrow if it was offered. I really would, because it's such, but you're quite close to the heart of government after all. Just occasionally you're talking to the Prime Minister that evening. You're meeting, you know, foreign leaders and maybe showing them what you're good at, or maybe they're showing you what they're good at. But there's nothing like the satisfaction you get from the ministerial job. That is true. I think for both of us, it's the greatest privilege of our life. It really is.
Absolutely. And you do meet so many people. I mean, you're right about foreign leaders. I mean, I was fortunate enough to be the Transport Minister with European responsibility when we had the presidency. And one of the jobs I had to do was to go around every member state and meet their transport minister and say, you know, what should we work on during the UK presidency together? And just, I mean, it was just a stunning job. And as I say, it's a privilege and an honour to have done it.
Yeah.
So you've changed my view that was basically coloured by the thick of it. So I'm really pleased. You've cheered me up and everything. Well, we could have talked all hour, and maybe if we do one of these TTFMs again, we'll have to get you back on again and talk again. But for now, thank you. I've really enjoyed that. Stephen Ladyman, who was, as I shall now say, Labour Transport Minister in the Blair government, and of course Steve Norris, who was Conservative Transport Minister in the 90s under John Major. Thank you both very much for joining us tonight. It's been fascinating.
Pleasure.
You're welcome. Thank you.
This is TTFM.
Thank you very much to Steve, as I say, and I hope you enjoyed that. That and Michael Rodd's interviews will be chopped up. The best bits will be put on future Highways Voices podcasts on the Highways News website, with thanks to the Transport Technology Forum. So you'll be able to hear those again and share the best bits of the two interviews in future podcasts, and you can share those with colleagues that maybe haven't been able to join us this evening. So let's get the team together now. We'll get Andy and Darren and Stephen's here. Steve Norris is gone, but Stephen Ladyman's still here. And we'll just finish off. And when we were putting together the idea of this programme, Andy suggested we do Transport's Got Talent. And as it happens, the interviews were so good that we've actually had very little time for Transport's Got Talent. But we have, I reckon, about 7 minutes to fill in. So I've got some sounds in front of me here. So who would like to hear, let me have a think, who would like to hear John Wade in his band The Reason sing Bohemian Like You? Would anyone like to hear this? This is Transport's Got Talent. Have a listen to this.
Well, you got a great car. Yeah, what's wrong with it today? I used to have one too, baby. I'll come and have a look. I really dig your hairdo, yeah. I'm glad you like mine too. I think we're looking pretty good. Now get you.
I think we've got the post-dinner band for the next conference when we all meet in 3 Dimension, haven't we? That's John Wade and Bohemian Like You. So we'll just fade that one out now, because I'm going to move on to the next, which is Ian Catling. This is Cats. What do you think of his Inner Elvis?
For a party in the county jail, the prison man was there and he began to wail. The band were jumping and the joint began to swing. You should have heard us knock out jail band sing, let's rock. Everybody, let's rock. Everybody in the hostel rock.
Here, Andy, let's rock.
Poptastic, mate. Poptastic.
That's Ian Catling, and
Singers and everything.
It's and then I just want to go to also people might know Kevin Boris, who is another trade press editor, has been around the intelligent transport systems industry since God was a boy, and Kevin is also a singer. He's had various bands, and here I want you to see if you can spot the special guest in this particular song.
When her friend visited, saying, "Let's go to the beach, it's a wonderful day," the butterflies fluttering in her tummy told her that really she needed to wrap her best china in oil.
Any idea who this is?
Take her to the cellar, and perhaps whilst down there, make up the camp bed and ensure there was kerosene in the lantern.
Any idea?
Jenny Martin, come on down.
It was indeed Jenny Martin of ITS UK, who in certainly for a couple of days a week is also known as my boss. So I will say nothing more about that. And then we move into Kevin Boris's attempt at what sounds like 70s Genesis. I mean, he sounds like he can sing. So there you go. That's Kevin. So which order, gentlemen? If we were to have the next TTF conference and we had bands playing around the dinner as well as an after-dinner speaker, for example, which order would we go? Would we go John Wade, Ian Catling, Kevin Boris? Which order would we go? Our three bands.
Oh, I think that sounds a good opening gambit there, Paul. I think. But we've also got a mystery singer. Are we going to play the mystery singer?
Yeah, well, right. Now, this is possible. Now, when I worked on commercial radio, okay, we had a competition on the breakfast show I did, which was called Birthday Balls, and every radio station that was owned by the same group all had this, and it was a big tombola with ping pong balls in it, and the competition was rubbish because you pulled out a ball that had a date written on it, and you said, is your birthday, listener, the 17th of March? And they'd go, no. And that would be the end of the competition because there was virtually no chance of them ever winning. And the other thing was they knew they'd won before we did, which never works very well on a competition. I've now found one worse because Andy went, why don't we do the mystery singer? So I said, okay, then. So he sent some audio through of a mystery singer, and this will take 0.002 milliseconds to work out who it is.
Completely round is the perfect pearl the oyster manufactures. Completely round is the steering wheel that leads to compound fractures.
If you're not sure who this is, just think of the Gary Ties.
Is the golden fruit that hangs from the orange tree. Yes, the circle shape is quite renowned, but sad to say it can be found in the low-down, dirty runaround.
It's only going to get worse if he starts whistling. You do know that, don't you?
To me, yes, my true love.
Whatever you do,
gave
Eric,
to
don't
me.
whistle.
Complete.
And all those tracks will be available on That's What I Call TTF. It will be available in a record store bargain bin near you from Monday. Right, gentlemen, I think we're pretty much done on TTFM over the last 2 days. We've got to thank our special guests tonight, Stephen Ladyman and Steve Norris, for a fascinating walk through ministerial memories. I'd like to also thank again Michael Rodd for some fascinating conversation yesterday. As I say, we'll chop it all up and put it on future Highways Voices podcasts for you to listen to. But I shall leave it to the gurus that are behind the TTF, Darren Capes and Andy Graham, to finish off tonight's TTFM and let Stephen Ladyman get to in front of his television for the Liverpool-Chelsea game. So, gentlemen, thank you very much for the evening. We'll see it out, and then voiceover man can end the programme.
Well, go on, Darren.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to echo the previous comments, really. I don't think there's much more to say than that. It's been a great conference. It's the first one we've done online, and it seems to be working. TTFM is an inspired idea, which I think we'll do again, definitely in some form. So thank you all for your efforts, and thank you to the special guests.
Yeah, just to say thanks very much, Stephen, particularly for staying on right to the end of the conference. Very interested to hear about Top Gear. Just a special thank you to Paul, The Voice, and to Luke and to Ed for putting all this together behind the scenes. It's been seamless and really good fun. So thank you very much. Over to you, voiceover man.
On behalf of all of us tonight, thank you for joining this live stream described by critics as an inspired idea. I'm sure it will return. This has been TTFM. Now, Liverpool play Chelsea. Thank you for listening.